another stream from the ACT Chess Association covering their online events, which are being held at the moment on leadchess.org, while the Canberra Chess Clubs are not meeting face-to-face. Once again, hopefully some good news towards the end of the month when a lot of the restrictions are being lifted, and hopefully either get back to street chess for some outdoor chess, or even the local chess clubs getting back face-to-face. My name is Sean Press. I organise these events on behalf of the ACT Chess Association, and the event I'm covering was played last night, 12th of October, and it was our regular Tuesday Rapid tournament. Had a good field of 16 players taking part, and there was a tie for first between two junior players, actually, Larry Cheng and Joshua Barnett from Sydney, who is a guest in our tournaments as well. I'm going to have a look at a game that was played by one of the winners as black, and this was between Masaki H8 white and Mikhail Tal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as black. With a name like Mikhail Tal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, obviously there's going to be some attacking chess taking place in this game. So off we go with e4, e6. So French defense, which Tal himself did play, d4, d5, and white decided to play the exchange variation, which is quite popular in Canberra. It's a safe way of meeting the French, and I think that's why it has some popularity at the moment. White can whip up some sort of attack if they play the position right. The slight drawback for white is that one of the bad features of the French for black is that this bishop down here is blocked in by a pawn that normally sits on this square, but with the exchange on d5, this bishop is free to move. And often, at least the first part of this game, it's just about developing pieces. White played c4, pressuring the center. There are a couple of other moves here. We can just go for straight development with moves like bishop d3, knight f3, knight f6, and we castle. But in this symmetrical position, a move like h3 can contain a slight drop of poison. The idea is you're preventing black from pinning the knight on f3, but after something like knight c6, in some lines at least, the best line for white is to pin the knight on f6 and then try and pressure the d-pawn, for example. But in this case, white just played c4. And there are a couple of different ideas here. We could play bishop b4 check here, knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, castles, bishop e2 preparing to castle. And this is kind of a line that white could have gone for in a different way, but chose not to. Tip, should go for this line. Okay, played knight f6, knight c3, bishop b4 now. And you shouldn't worry too much about some moves. Bishop d3 is probably best here. Black can try and punish white for moving the bishop to d3 by then taking on d4. The difference between the two positions here, taking straight away versus waiting a move and then taking, is of course obviously white spent a move moving the bishop to d3 and then to c4. After bishop takes c4, we castle, knight out, rook e8, bishop e3. And this position's pretty equal. Black has castled and got the rook to the e-file. White still has to castle. But on the other hand, white has got all the small pieces off the back of the board, while black needs to do that. And you shouldn't be afraid of, after bishop d3, having your pawns doubled, because after bishop takes b takes c3, you're protecting the d-pawn, and that's quite strong. And even if you now play this, this position is okay for white, slightly plus, to be honest. Because those pawns in the center take up more territory and control more territory than black's non-existent pawns. But this is a relatively safe and peaceful line for both sides, and then it just becomes a question of who is able to, I suppose, not play the worst moves in this position. Having said that, I've seen people argue that because white is actually playing a lot of times for a draw, and this line is used against stronger players as black, it still wins for black, not because the position is better for black, but because black is just the better player. So bishop d2 here, and this turns out to be a small inaccuracy, because after castles, there is a problem now, and that is the d-pawn, and we'll see why in a second. Best, I think, here for white is to take on d5, which will become clear in a while. But black can play essentially some disruptive moves here. We can start with a check, and after bishop e2, then we can play bishop g4 here. And the point is, if we bring the knight out, for example, to this square here, after bishop takes, the bishop is in no position to recapture because of the pin down the e-file. And you have to take here with horrible, horrible pawns. You can play bishop e3 here to block the file, and in fact, you're now threatening to take the bishop on g4 because you've broken the pin. But after retreating here, bishop here, knight takes d5. Black actually has not a bad position because, one, you're just simply threatening to take on c3 and then win a pawn, and if you're not careful, the exchange. You're also threatening to take on e3 and win a pawn. And the d pawn is now isolated as well. So there are no pawns that can protect white's pawn on d4 here, and that becomes a bit of a weakness in some variations because the white pieces have to defend it. Instead, white played bishop e2 and essentially just lost a pawn here. Okay? That doesn't mean that it was a terrible move. It's more a question of how black deals with losing this pawn. Bishop takes c4 didn't quite do it. The other choice is to play something like knight f3 here, and then we get the kind of, wouldn't say a long forcing line, but knight c6, threatening to win another pawn, obviously. Bishop takes c4. So we take, bishop goes here, but then after bishop takes, pawn takes, knight back to f5, castles, knight takes e3, queen takes d8, rook takes here. Black is certainly better in this position, in part because the pawns on c3 and e3 are once again on their own and need to be defended by pieces rather than other pawns, which means that black should have more freedom to move the pieces around, while white's pieces are generally trying to concentrate on protecting pawns. Instead, bishop takes c4 was played, so queen lands on d4, and this is actually much better for black now. Nice centralized queen, which is a little bit hard to kick for the moment, but more importantly, white's king is stuck in the center, and this becomes important over the next few moves. With the bishop back to b3, otherwise you don't want to lose your bishop. Rook e8 was not a bad choice, attacking the king. A stronger move would have been knight e4 here. You are threatening simply to mate on f2. Okay, best move is queen e2. You can play something like this, knight takes, but then you've got a problem in some lines where bishop takes d2 is going to happen. Queen takes g2 is also a big threat here in this position. You can block with queen e2, but then after knight takes c3, pawn takes, bishop takes, hitting the rook. If you play bishop takes, queen takes, just collects the rook to a fork, and the rook goes here. And after bishop g4, knight f3, black is actually 2 pawns ahead in this position and easily winning. Rook e8 was fine though. Knight g blocking. Again, you could play something like bishop g4, taking advantage of the fact that the king is stuck in the center. And there's still lots of threats here to take on c3 and to take on e2. Queen e5, centralizing the queen. It's okay. But now we can castle. But while I was looking at this game, a bonkers computer line kept flashing up, which I didn't trust, and it turns out that I was right not to trust it. Bishop takes f7, and at first this looks like there's a little tactical trick here, but there's an important lesson which you'll see shortly in this line, and that is the longer the line is, the more chance is that there's something wrong. And more importantly, at the end, you've always got to keep looking that one move further if you can. So after queen takes, the idea is you play queen b3 check here, and you're attacking the king and you're attacking the bishop. So and if the king moves, you just take the bishop and you've picked up your pawn, and it's back to relatively equal position. So you play knight d5 to protect the bishop and to block the diagonal at the same time. But it means you can just take here. Queen takes, knight takes. And at first, white might think, hey, this is pretty cool. I've managed to win back my piece. I've taken a pawn. It's all looking great. But this is the forcing lines. You've got to look at all checks and captures. And you've also got to look at that one move ahead. bishop takes, there's a check, and after king takes, rook d8, and suddenly the knight's pinned. Okay, and you're just going to play rook takes d5, or if you protect it with the other knight, then you're just going to play c6 and win the piece. And so instead of winning a pawn, you've managed to blunder a piece in this line. On the one hand, it's all a very straightforward line. On the other hand, trying to calculate this over the board, and also in this case, the tournament was a 10-minute tournament, 10-minute plus 2-second increment, is quite hard. It's one of these things, I think, where it's better that you see this and you remember it for next time, essentially. So white castle, whether they saw that line not working or whether they didn't consider it, neither here nor there. So we castle. And black started to drift a little bit here. Bishop g4 keeps popping up for a good reason, I think, because it's exploiting the pins. And after f3, bishop e6 here. And white certainly is struggling to find any compensation for the pawn. Bishop c5 kind of looks okay, but white missed a chance here. Now, to be fair, it's probably a slightly hard chance to spot, but knight g3 is the right move here for two reasons. One, it moves the knight off a vulnerable square in case there are tactics. So now there's no risk of lots of things being captured and suddenly the knight on e2 falling. And two, it clears the way for the queen to come to a good square. So, for example, a couple of lines here that are worth looking at. Queen d4 is probably the best response. And after bishop here, queen takes, rook takes, bishop b6. And certainly white is still down a pawn, but I think white's got a lot of activity in this position. I mean, I'm not gonna kid myself and say this is equal for white, but it's better than it was because after bishop e6, for example, queen f3 is a nice move for white here, and you're actually threatening to take on b7. And there are a couple of ways of going wrong in this position. So, for example, knight c6, normally a good idea. We're developing a piece. We're blocking the threats against c7, but then bishop f4 lands on the board. And after queen here, knight b5 is a nice move because you're now attacking both rooks with knight takes c7, and you've managed to win a pawn, and you're about to pick up the exchange in some lines. So that is no good. The other weird line that I found was after bishop takes b3, rook a1, and then I realised that this is because there's some problems where the queen goes. For example, if the queen goes to d6, rook takes, knight takes, and then the queen hits b7, attacking the rook on a8. Always a good tactic. And if we play something like queen c6 to protect the rook, queen takes b3, and you've definitely won back your pawn here. And you haven't wrecked your pawn structure by taking with the a-pawn, and white is even slightly better in this position. And the other move after queen f3 is knight a6 here to kind of deal with any potential threats of bishop f5, bishop takes c7. But then just simply queen takes b7 is equal enough in this position as well. So yeah, knight g3, not because the knight did anything as much as it cleared the way for the queen to go to f3, which would have been a good move. Bishop f4 seems natural. We're attacking the queen in this position, asking the queen to move. So the queen retreated to e7, which also protects c7. So we're not getting any tricks there. Now knight came to g3. Okay. And then the bishop went to g4, attacking the queen. And note, we can't play f3 now because the bishop did retreat to c5 to cover the diagonal. Queen d2 was probably the right move here, but after knight c6, again, black's completed their development. The pieces are actually quite well posted, and white's not getting too much activity for the pawn. Instead, the queen went to c2, which sometimes is a good square, but not in this case, because basically when the knight either goes to b4 or d4, it is actually attacking the queen, and you're getting a free move. Sometimes it's good to just keep an eye on where your opponent's pieces are. And then white played what looked plausible, rook fe1, and then got hit with a thunderbolt. As I said, if you're going to use Mikhail Tal as part of your username, you're going to find moves like queen takes e1. And at first, I suspect white might have thought that black hadn't quite worked this one out, because after rook takes, there is no mate. But there are two things working in black's favour here. One, you've won 2 rooks for the queen anyway, and that nominally favours the 2 rooks on a material basis, with a warning that if you don't keep your pieces well protected, the queen can go berserk. Okay, so that's the first thing. But secondly, it turns out that even though knight to f1 stopped the immediate mate, if black can bring enough pieces over to e2, there is still going to be a potential checkmate. And this is exactly what black saw. Knight d4, attacking the queen. So as I said, queen c2 wasn't the greatest move. If the queen had been on d2, this wouldn't have worked quite as well. So queen goes to d3, and then bishop e2. The other option here is to play knight e2 check, because if the king moves into the corner, okay, you simply get checkmated, which kind of turned out to be what happened in the game. If you play knight takes e2, then you play bishop e2 here, and again you're threatening both to take the queen and to play rook takes f1 checkmate. Okay, so really there's no choice but to take here with the queen, but after rook takes e2, if you count the pieces, black still has 2 rooks and a pawn, and white only has a bishop in compensation, so more than enough for black to easily win this ending. Bishop e2 was fine as well. Attacks the queen straight away. White could play the kind of desperate queen b1 here, but after rook takes, pawn takes, knight e4. Again, the rook on a8 is the extra piece here, which is more than enough to finish the game off for black. So knight took it here on e2 instead. Okay, but now knight takes here, and the choices are what happened in the game with king h1, or to play queen takes e2, rook takes e2, and yeah, basically we're back to that position that we saw before, where simply black is ahead 2 rooks and winning the game. So white decided to go out on their shield with king h1, rook takes f1, checkmate, and that was it. So it was an interesting game. Wasn't perfect from both sides, but there were very few mistakes. Interesting enough, one of the ways I choose games for this summary is I do go through most of the games, some of which I've seen live happening and seeing whether they look interesting or not, but also I tend to run the rule over them afterwards to see how many sort of blunders and mistakes were made. I'm not going to choose a game that is basically 5 blunders on each side. It's kind of a little bit hard to annotate, but this one was relatively error-free. The 2 main mistakes, one was a very small one, which was bishop e2 here, even though, to be honest, bishop d2 was the actual mistake. That started the downhill slide. But bishop e2 was the real, I'm going to lose a pawn type mistake in this position. And of course, then the nice tactic down here with queen takes e1, lowering the boom on white's back rank, and then just finding the right follow-up to convert to a win. So thanks for tuning in. My name is Sean Press. I run these events on behalf of the ACT Chess Association. Do these summaries the next day, normally around 10 a.m. Canberra time. So there's no event running this evening, but tomorrow there will be our standard event, which is a long time control event where we're playing 40 minutes at the start, plus 15 seconds per move. So normally the quality of chess is a little bit higher in those events. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll be seeing you later.